Chapter 1. The Encounter. The arid desert stretched infinitely, the oppressive heat rising in visible waves off the cracked golden earth. A convoy of armored military vehicles rumbled across the barren landscape, the distant mountains standing as silent sentinels against the endless sky. The air was thick with tension, a palpable anxiety that clung to the soldiers like the dust kicked up by their boots. They had trained for this moment, yet nothing could have prepared them for the encounter that awaited them. As the convoy approached a remote, previously uncharted section of the desert, a shimmering distortion appeared in the sky. The soldiers watched in a mixture of awe and dread as the air seemed to tear open, revealing a massive disc-shaped craft. The silence was deafening as the craft descended with an almost ethereal grace, settling onto the desert floor with a low hum that reverberated through the ground. The soldiers dismounted, their weapons at the ready, hearts pounding in their chests. Their commander, a grizzled veteran with a steely gaze, gave the order to spread out and approach with caution. The tension was electric, each step toward the craft measured and deliberate. The soldiers' breaths were shallow, their senses heightened as they scanned the area for any sign of movement. Then the silence was broken by a low, guttural growl. The soldiers froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. Emerging from the shadows of the alien craft was a figure, humanoid in shape but unmistakably extraterrestrial. Its skin was a mottled gray, stretched tight over a wiry frame, with large, black, unblinking eyes that reflected the harsh sunlight. In its elongated hands, it clutched a weapon that looked both familiar and terrifyingly foreign. The alien stood silently, its gaze fixed on the soldiers as if assessing them, reading their every move. The soldiers held their ground, their weapons trained on the creature, fingers hovering over the triggers. But no one dared to fire the first shot. It was as if an unspoken understanding hung in the air, a fragile truce that could shatter with the slightest provocation. Suddenly, the craft emitted a series of pulsating lights, casting an eerie glow over the scene. The alien shifted its gaze toward the ship, and for a moment, the soldiers thought it might retreat. But instead, the alien slowly raised its weapon, aiming it not at the humans, but at the sky. And then, the sky split open again. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. What came through the rift defied all understanding. A fleet of smaller crafts, sleek and dark, shot out of the opening like predatory birds, circling above the alien and the soldiers. The commander barked orders, and the soldiers fell into formation, their training taking over. They were ready to defend, but against what? The enemy was still unknown, and that terrified them more than anything. The alien remained motionless, its eyes locked on the commander. There was a silent exchange between them, a moment where time seemed to stand still. Then, as if understanding the gravity of the situation, the alien lowered its weapon and took a step forward, toward the soldiers. The soldiers tensed, fingers twitching on their triggers, but the commander raised a hand, signaling them to hold their fire. The alien stopped a few paces from the commander, close enough for him to see the intricate, almost organic patterns etched into its skin. It spoke, not in words, but in a series of clicks and hums that resonated within the minds of the soldiers. They didn't understand the language, but the meaning was clear. It was not here to fight them, but to warn them. Before anyone could react, the fleet of smaller crafts began to descend. The air crackled with energy as they formed a tight circle around the alien and the soldiers. The ground trembled beneath them, and the temperature plummeted. The soldiers felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a bone-chilling fear that seeped into their very souls. The alien turned to face the descending crafts, its posture tense, as if preparing for a final stand. The commander realized then that they were not the target, the alien was, and whatever was coming through that rift was far more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. The first shot rang out, not from the soldiers but from the alien. A beam of blinding light shot from its weapon, striking one of the crafts and sending it spiraling into the ground. The soldiers were momentarily stunned, but the commander's voice cut through the chaos, ordering them to open fire. The desert erupted into a cacophony of gunfire and explosions as the soldiers joined the alien in its desperate battle. But the enemy was relentless. For every craft they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The soldiers fought valiantly, their resolve fueled by the unspoken understanding that they were fighting for their very survival. But deep down, they knew that this was a battle they could not win. Chapter 3. The final stand. As the battle raged on, the alien fought with a ferocity that left the soldiers in awe. It moved with a speed and precision that defied the laws of physics, its weapon an extension of its will. But even the alien's incredible abilities were not enough to stem the tide. The crafts continued to descend, their numbers overwhelming. The commander knew they were running out of time. He had seen the look in the alien's eyes, a look of desperation mixed with determination. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight to prevent something far worse from happening. The commander made a decision. He ordered his men to fall back, to regroup and find a way to escape. But he knew that not all of them would make it out alive. The alien must have understood the commander's decision. It nodded, a gesture that was both alien and eerily human. Then, with a final defiant roar, it charged into the heart of the enemy fleet, drawing their fire away from the soldiers. The commander watched as the alien fought with every ounce of strength it had left, a lone warrior against an unstoppable force. The soldiers began to retreat, covering each other as they made their way back to the convoy. The ground shook with the force of the explosions, and the air was thick with smoke and debris. But the soldiers pressed on, their focus solely on getting out alive. As they reached the safety of the convoy, the commander looked back one last time. The alien was still fighting, but its movements were slowing, its strength fading. The crafts were closing in, their weapons trained on the lone figure. The commander felt a pang of guilt, but he knew there was nothing more he could do. The rift in the sky began to close, and with it, the crafts started to retreat. The alien, now surrounded, raised its weapon one last time. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. The soldiers stood in stunned silence, watching as the last of the crafts disappeared through the closing rift. The alien was gone, its fate unknown. The commander felt a heavy weight in his chest, a sense of loss that he couldn't quite explain. They had survived, but at what cost? The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. Days turned into weeks as the soldiers returned to their base, their minds haunted by the memories of that fateful encounter. The government swiftly moved to cover up the incident, erasing any evidence that it ever happened. But the soldiers knew the truth. They had seen what was out there, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before it returned. The commander, now a man burdened with the weight of knowledge, spent his nights poring over the scant information they had gathered. The alien had tried to communicate with them, to warn them of the greater threat. But what was that threat? And why had the alien been willing to sacrifice itself to protect them? The answers remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of a universe far more vast and dangerous than they had ever imagined. The commander knew that they had only scratched the surface of something far beyond their comprehension. And as the nights grew longer, he found himself staring up at the stars, wondering when they would return. Because they would return, and next time they might not be so fortunate. The alien's sacrifice had bought them time, but for how long? The commander knew one thing for certain: they had to be ready. The fate of the world depended on it.